So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to create this illustrated pet portrait in Procreate. This format is flexible because you can change the face or the pet to match any reference, and I think this would make for a really great customizable product that you could sell on Etsy. As always, I'll list the brushes I'm using for this in the description, but I think you can follow this with any brushes you're comfortable with. So as you can see, I've already got the sketch placed in here, and you can download this for free in the description. I just placed it up here as the top layer, and then I set it to multiply, and then I just kind of controlled the opacity so I can barely see it. And then to start painting, I'll just make sure I'm on a blank layer down here below everything. And I'm going to start by painting the face, and I'm going to follow the same process I explained last week. It's just a 10-step process for painting simple faces, but I'll quickly go over it again. So first, I'm going to paint the head and the neck. So I'll choose a pretty saturated skin tone, and I'll use the consistent quill brush, and I'll try to do this in one stroke. And of course, I'm just trying to follow a kind of a reference photo that I've already picked out, but you could use any reference you want and sort of customize this. After that, I'll shrink the brush size and paint the ears kind of halfway down the side of the head. Now on the neck, I like to add a shadow just to give some contrast with the chin. So I'm going to do that with the freehand selection tool. I'll just select along the chin like this, and then I'll darken it. Next, I'll turn off the sketch and move on and do the nose. And I'm going to do this on another layer just because I might want to move it around later. The nose is going to be a somewhat redder version of the skin tone. And for the brush, I'm going to use the fine liner pen, and I'll just draw it on like this. If you want, you can also use a darker color to add some nostrils. After the nose, I can do the eyes. And then for the pupils or the iris, I'll just choose a dark brown color and just freehand them like this. And for the mouth, I'm going to do it sideways. I just find it a little bit easier. For the brush, I'll use the consistent quill again, but I'm going to use it at a really small size. And I'll just do kind of one stroke like this that sort of tapers. So I'll use a light pressure, press harder, and then taper it off. Then I'll add a little dot on each end. And then to add a kind of line, I'll just choose a darker color and a very light pressure here just to draw a line like this. After that, I need to refine the kind of shape of the mouth. So first, I think I'll just select it with the freehand selection tool and just kind of move it down a little bit. There we go. And then I'll refine the shape using the liquify tool. And usually what I do is I'll just sort of bring up the upper lip like this. Then I'll shrink the size and then pull it down in the center. Then for the bottom lip, I'll do the same thing, but this time I'll just pull it out. And I think this portrait would look nice if she's smiling. So I'll make the brush size here a little bit larger, and I'll just use this to pull up the corners of the mouth. Next, I'll do the eyebrows. And for that, I'll switch my brush to the colored pencil, and I'll just draw them on like this. After that, I'll move on and do the hair. And just like in last week's video, I prefer to do that on its own kind of blank layer. That's because I like to adjust the colors afterwards. For the brush, I pretty much just use the Shoto brush, and I'll try to paint this on with as few strokes as possible. And since she's going to be wearing a hat, I don't have to worry about the top of the head too much. After that, I'll add some texture. So I'm going to switch to the colored pencil brush, and I'll just use this at a kind of a lighter hair color, and just scribble it like this in the direction of the hair. And then once the hair is pretty much roughed out like this, I'm going to refine the color and make it match the reference a little bit better. Now for this portrait, the hair is pretty much covered up the ears, and I think I'd like them to show up. And I think the best way to do that is to just erase through the hair to expose the ear. So for that, I'll grab the eraser brush, set to the fine liner pen, and I'll just scribble a bit until I can see where the ear is. Then I'll undo that and just try to remember where it was and expose a little bit of it like this. And finally, once all the main features of the face are finished, I'm going to move on and do a little bit of refinement. And for that, everything needs to be on one layer, so I'll just merge it together. Then I'll use the liquify tool set to push, and I'll just kind of adjust and squish the overall shape to sort of match the reference a little bit better. And mostly, I'm just sort of adjusting the chin and the cheekbones and the eye position. Next, I can move on and do the accessories, and for this portrait it's just a hat, and that's pretty simple. I'll just make a separate layer and then fill it in with the fine liner pen. And to bring out some depth with the hat in the head, I think I need to add a shadow kind of on the hat itself, and also one being cast to the head, and I'll do both of those with the selection tool, and I'll just use it set to freehand. And for example, I think I'll just select across here, around the top, and I'll lighten the top part. After that, I think I'll select just the top part of the lip here, and I'll darken it. And that gives us just a little bit of contrast there. And for this line, I'll just use the water blender to soften it. And then for the shadow on the head, I'll make sure I select the head layer. Then I'll use the freehand selection tool to make a selection just like this. Then I can use the hue, saturation, and brightness to darken it a tiny bit. And that's pretty much it for the face, but I have decided that I want to add some rosy cheeks, and that's pretty easy. So for that, I'll make another blank layer. I'll choose a pretty saturated red tone, and I'll just scribble them on using the colored pencil brush. Then I'll go to Adjustments, Gaussian Blur, and I'll just soften it up like this. After that, I'll set this layer to multiply, lower it to 0, and then slowly raise it back up just until I can barely see it. There we go. Then of course after that, I'll just merge everything for the face together onto one layer. And once the face is finished, we can move on to the rest of the character. So for that, I'll turn the sketch back on, and I'm going to start by just erasing the kind of neck here to match the sketch a little bit better. And then after that, I can paint the shirt, and in this case, it's really simple. I'll just make a separate layer. For the brush, I'm going to use the Shoto brush, and I'll paint the shirt in 2 steps. First, I'm just going to sort of outline everything with this sort of grayish blue color. After that, I'll add all these stripes, just kind of giving the fabric a direction. And if you want to bring out a little bit more contrast with the shirt, you can darken this tone, and then just go along some of these inner lines here. And that pretty much finishes up the shirt. Next, I'm going to move on and do the cat. And the reason I'm doing the cat and not the hands is just because where the hands are kind of interacting here, it's a little bit complicated. So in this case, I think I'll just add the hands at the very end because it's going to be easier to sort of line everything up. So for the cat, I'll make another blank layer, and this is going to be a black cat. So I'm going to choose a very dark blue tone like this. For the brush, I'll use the Shoto brush, and I'll just cover the silhouette of the cat just in a bunch of kind of random brush strokes. And I'm doing this because I want to create an interesting texture. And of course, I've gone way beyond the kind of lines on the sketch, so I need to cut it back. But I have a problem because I can't really see those lines. And I think the best way to solve this is to increase the opacity of the sketch to maximum. And then you can lower the opacity of the cat just temporarily until you can see the outlines. After that, we can just grab the eraser brush and just cut everything back to match the sketch. And of course, after that, I'll just return the opacity back to 100. And for this cat in particular, because it's a black cat, we don't have a lot of contrast on the body to show the legs, and I'm going to do that just by adding some shading. So for that, I'll use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just sort of outline where I think the legs should be, and I'll do it to both legs. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just brighten it like that, just a little bit. Then I'll switch to my water blender brush, and I'll just use this to kind of smooth out the transition. This won't really make the legs perfectly visible, but kind of on a subconscious level, you can see that they're there. Next, I can move on and do the face details on the cat, and that'll be on a separate layer, and it's pretty easy. I'm going to do it all with the fine liner pen, and I'll start with the eyes. And the eyes are just these sort of bright yellow circles, so I'll just draw them on like this. Then I'll duplicate that layer, and I'll just kind of move it over to create the other eye. There we go. Then I'll merge those together. And then I'll use a pink tone to paint the nose, which is basically just a little heart. For the collar, I'll just scribble it on using the colored pencil brush and red. And with the cat finished, I can move on and paint the hands. And they're super easy. I'm just going to paint one hand and then copy it over. So I'll make a new layer above everything, and I'll just fill out the hand using a skin tone and then the fine liner pen. Then I'll just duplicate the hand layer and move it over and mirror it. And since the legs of the cat are supposed to be in front of the hands, I'll just erase through that hand to create a space. And at this point, the illustration could be finished, but I want to add a really simple warp and skew to make it more interesting. So for that, I'll make sure everything is merged together onto one layer, and I want to apply a skew to the head that's separate from the body. So to do that, I'll use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just start by selecting the body, and I'll sort of cut across the neck. Then I'll use the arrow tool, set to distort, and I'll just kind of skew the body like this. Then I'll line it back up. After that, I'll select just the head this time, and I'll skew it the other way. There we go. After that, I'll do my best to sort of kind of align the head back onto the body. And there's going to be a little bit of a seam here, but I can fix that by smoothing it out with the water blender. And just like that, this portrait is finished. As I mentioned earlier, I think this illustration format would make for a really great customizable listing for Etsy, or you could also just use it as a gift for your family or friends. As always, please give this video a like if you think I've earned it, and here are 2 more cute illustration tutorials I think you'll love to watch next.